All right, guys. So are gonna be shorter sessions. So I'll take the first few minutes, and Todd, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction.
Sure.
And these sessions are mostly slated to be 30 minutes. So that's what we've asked Todd for. And so we've asked him if he could speak for about 15 minutes, and then we can move to Q&A. You'll notice on the calendars, that's not what we've reserved time for. So if ever these conversations can go long, we want to be open to it. So Todd, do you have a hard stop? How should we be mindful of your time?
I'm good till 1:30 Eastern.
Okay, perfect. And so we'll extend it and just kind of let the conversation go where it will then in that case. So for everyone's edification, the LinkedIn bios in the calendar invite. So if you're ever choosing a go to for the information, I'll give you a few highlights of my brief interactions with Todd and also what we've just been able to assess. So some of the things that made me think of Todd for this session, and this session is one of the first ones, is just his experience coaching. And all of you guys have started working with your coaches, and it's good and helpful to have a realistic assessment of how do you work with a coach. So that's why this is the theme of one of the first ones. So setting off, how do you work with coaches really well? Todd's experience in coaching is extensive. So he's the co-founder and CEO from Founder to CEO podcast. Todd, I think you told me also that you've coached 2,000 teams. Is that right?
Over 2,000 individuals.
Individuals. Yes. And so so Todd's a person that's well experienced in coaching. And I got so moved in my first call with him that I was like, Todd, you got to coach me. And he asked the great first question, which is, what do you want out of it? And I still haven't gotten it to him yet because I've been deliberating it so much. And so I have found him to be very reflective and inspiring when talking about that type of thing. And then fun other components, military background. So we have some people who have military backgrounds as well in here, DJ being one of them, and has had various leadership experiences, but is also in Cincinnati right now. And so if anybody is close to there, know that you can't visit him anyway. So it's COVID time, but maybe when things get back to normal, you can. So Todd, I just wanted to make it real brief, and that's a helpful background. If you think I omitted anything, let me know, but we're happy to give you the next 15 minutes. And when we progress, I'll just do a mental marker at 12:20, and I'll say, let's move to Q&A if you're not finished by that.
Sounds great. Do you mind if I share my screen now?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's nice to be with all of you today. Thank you for taking the time to be together. This is one of my favorite topics, and I thought I might talk about my perspective about how to work with a mentor by just telling you a story about someone that I mentored that it went very well, and talk about the different pieces of it that I encourage you to think about. So I'll tell you the story, and then we can have our Q&A time. So as the founder of a startup in the Midwest that contacted me to learn more about mentoring. And of course, now I'm trying to, there we go. And so we had a good conversation about what mentoring was and what it was not, because there's a difference between coaching and mentoring. We aligned our definition around the idea of him seeking feedback, being a sounding board, and seeking clarity. So clarity for him was a big deal. A lot of entrepreneurs and founders struggle with that. We all do at some point in time in our lives. And so that was a big part of what he was looking for. So the matching is really important too. If you are not already matched with a coach or a mentor, I think it's a really important conversation to have. I asked Gary what he was looking for with a mentor. In Gary's case, he was looking for good rapport, good chemistry, knowledge of the startup space. And for him, sensitivity to issues of diversity and inclusion were very important to him. He asked for my goals. And I paused and I said, well, I was looking for someone who's highly engaged and willing to stay committed to the relationship, because as a mentor, you want to make sure that the other person is just as committed as you are. So we both agreed that we'd be a good match. So for homework, I asked him to email me his goals and outcomes, right, John? And, and that he hoped for in our relationship. And he outlined help navigating some leadership issues in the startup, as well as support with some external stakeholders. So now we had some very specific things that he wanted to walk through. So in our next meeting, Gary and I talked about his goals, and we created a verbal contract. that summarized his expectations, my expectations, and he hoped that I would challenge his perception of things, because in his mind, he looked at things from a very, very narrow perspective based upon his experiences. So we discussed frequency. We agreed to talk for about an hour and a half every other week on Tuesday afternoons. We committed to 6 months with the option to renew if we both felt it was working out. Okay? So frequency is a big deal, because you don't want to get feelings hurt about when the expectation is that you will have a kind of a formal opportunity to get together. So then it was scope. We discussed scope. He really wanted to focus on his professional life. I mentioned that it may be challenging to limit the scope of our conversations to just his work life and his professional life. For me, oftentimes the line between personal life and professional life for a founder is a bit blurry, kind of interdependent. And we had a good laugh about that. We were both sharing some stories around those types of issues. And he told me he appreciated kind of the gentle pushback, and that it was a good example of what he was looking for in a mentor relationship. So that was kind of a live version of him getting comfortable that, okay, he made a good choice in me as a mentor. So mode. So nowadays it's challenging, right? I mean, I feel like we're all on Zoom, Google Meet, or Teams meetings all day. However, this was before COVID-19. And so I always think it's very important to understand the mode. How does one want to interact? So Gary likes supporting local restaurants. It's very important to him to make sure that they invest in local economy. So we agreed to meet in person at places that he chose, some restaurants, some coffee places where there was a quiet corner. And I offered my phone number for impromptu text messages in between. And I told him, except after 8 p.m. Because after 8 p.m., I try to make sure that I put aside time for me and my wife so we can talk about our days and get ready for the next day. And I have kids too. So we established that the mode was going to be in person. It was going to be usually at a local restaurant or coffee shop, and we weren't going to be doing Zoom. Again, this is before COVID-19, but occasionally when we needed to talk about something fast and furious, or talk through a real live consequential situation, that I would do my best to make myself available via either text, email, or on the phone. Communication. So for me, as the mentor, it's really important to manage my calendar effectively. I work with lots of people, and I as a mentor, I always want to make sure that I'm available when I say I'm going to be available. So if I give someone dates, like today's Friday, and we're mapping out the next 2 months of meeting, if I don't hear from a person in a week about those dates, then my calendar is already populating. And so it's frustrating, because then I said, well, those first 5 dates aren't available now, and then I feel bad as the mentor. So what I have done that worked with Gary as well is I just use my Schedule Once scheduling software, which is always keeping my calendar, up to date. Some people like using Calendly and other tools like that. Gary was fine using Schedule Once. In fact, he really liked it. And so from a communication perspective, email and Schedule Once was a good tool for us to use, so that we would be effectively managing both of our expectations about that. Agenda. Okay, so frequently mentor relationships can be a lot of different things to people, and being clear about an agenda is super important, because you want to maximize your time. Both parties are usually very, very busy. So I suggested a default agenda. And the one that I usually like to start with, and then ask the individual over the course of time, is this working for you, is to start off with 3 things. What are wins that you've had since we've last spoken? Because I find people don't take the time to be able to appreciate the wins, have a little bit of gratitude, and really understand the progress they're making. Something they learned or gained an insight into since we last met. So that's showing growth and development and reflection. And then a key struggle that may be something new that we hadn't really talked about before. So those are 3 default agendas. And Gary, in this particular case, thought it was a good idea. And especially since Gary, his personality, didn't really like to take the time to have to prepare for our meetings. His desire was to be more of a sounding board, impromptu type of relationship. So Gary's very busy, as many of you are, and as I am too, and many mentors are. In fact, I was just talking about this too. I interviewed the founder of Netflix yesterday, and it'll be published next Tuesday for my podcast. And we were talking about he's mentoring like 10 or 15 people now as part of his post-Netflix career. And he says, yeah, I'm working harder than I ever have, helping mentor all these individuals. And he gave me some examples of that. I said, so preparation must be a big deal. He says, well, most of them are kind of these impromptu kind of sounding board. The way he put it, he spends a lot of time helping co-founders mediate co-founder marriage issues, which can be time consuming. So preparing for it wasn't really something he could do. But since he didn't want our relationship to be heavy on preparation, I understood that because we don't have a lot of time, I at least told him that, okay, if there's something that you want to specifically talk about, email it me ahead of time, at least do that type of preparation. And, he kind of reluctantly agreed to that. And so, demeanor in the relationship becomes important when you do that. I appreciated his positive, engaging desire to interact in a positive way. It's a big deal for a mentor. Is the demeanor of the individual positive and engaging is frequently what I hear. And, I responded positively to his demeanor, felt like it was continued to be a good mutual beneficial relationship. So how we handled that preparation was good for both of us involved. So a few weeks later, Gary told me he could really use some feedback on something. Now, I think it's really important in a mentoring relationship to be specific about the type of feedback you're looking for. Gary was clear that he wanted my opinion about a bad situation that he was in. So I asked him if he really wanted my judgment and opinion on it, or does he just want me to help him think through his thoughts? He said yes. He wanted my opinion, my judgment. I gave it to him, but he seemed uncomfortable, and we had to kind of recalibrate our relationship because it seemed like I hurt his feelings. It's an awkward situation to be in, as a mentor. And he wasn't paying for this mentorship relationship. And I wanted to make sure that, that we work through that. So questions become very important. So we agreed that he needed to be a bit more thoughtful about the types of questions. And so once again, we reestablished in the situation and say, okay, Gary, if you want me to be more thoughtful rather than just giving my off-the-top opinion about things, you're going to have to, in consequential situations, send me the questions in advance so I can take some time to be able to think through that a little bit more. We both agree to do that, and that really strengthened our relationship in this mentor-mentee relationship, and it kind of helped us get through that little bit of a rough patch. Check-ins. So things went on for a while. We were both getting a lot out of the relationship, and I prompted periodic check-ins to make sure that our relationship was going well, that we're focused on the objectives that he wanted to focus on, and that it was helping him move forward on those two key areas that we talked about before, dealing with some key leadership issues and also dealing with some external stakeholder issues. And so I think sometimes if you're meeting twice a month, once every 2 months is being intentional about, okay, let's check in about our relationship is probably an important thing to do. You'll have a gauge of that, but I think being intentional about that is super important, as it was with Gary. So at about the 5-month mark, remember this was a 6-month mentorship that we agreed to, he told me he was appreciative about all the help and thought it was time to bring our relationship to a close. And he summarized his key takeaways. I summarized mine, and we agreed to keep in touch. I was a little sad that it was ending about a month early, to be very honest with you, because I really like Gary. super engaging person, super smart, and what he's working on is really very powerful, powerful startup that he's working on. But we knew it's time to end it because he was no longer getting any out of it, and if he wasn't, then I was looking for engagement. I was going to be getting the type of engagement. So it was what I would call a necessary pause or a necessary ending. I told him, I said, hey, if we would need to do this again at some point in time in the future, let me know. We'll be intentional about putting that together. But we really both have gotten out of the mentor-mentee relationship, what he wanted and what I wanted. This is a real story. Gary was a good fit for me. I was a good fit for him. We focused on some of the key parts of the relationship that worked for me and him. And I enjoyed it, and he enjoyed it. And I think focusing on those elements is what I really wanted to give you a taste of about what does a positive mentoring relationship look like. And so I will encourage you, if you haven't ever read these two books, Growing Influence by Ron Price and Stacey Ennis, and Monday Morning Leadership by David Cottrell. Monday Morning Leadership's been around for a while. It gives you a great window. It's one of these business fable books that gives you a great window into what does a positive mentor relationship look like. Growing Influence is a little bit more of I think it came out maybe a year ago. Monday Morning Leadership is a relationship between a young man and an older man. And then Growing Influence is a young professional woman to a man who is mentoring her. And I think they do a nice job of kind of mapping out what a positive mentorship relationship looks like for both parties. So that's what I want to share with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd. So for just points of order so that everyone remembers, and Todd, you're aware, we might have moms who might have kids in the background or things like that. So we're going to use the chat within Zoom to structure questions. If you guys just want to go verbally and unmute yourself, you have that opportunity, but I'll steward anything that's in the chat box. One of the things we've also been talking about, so Claire is one of the interns at the Idea Center who's helping out with this. She is taking notes, but if there was anything that Todd said that you guys found especially important, I just ask that you put that in the chat. I'll do a demonstration in a second. I'm just going to do note in all caps dash whatever the comment was, and it might be a quote or what have you, but that's just going to make sure that what matters to you gets synthesized in our one-page summary sheets as well. So I'll take privilege of just asking first question, and then I'll open it up to everybody else. Todd, in the beginning, you said there's a difference between mentorship and coaching. Could you just define those a little bit?
Yeah, sure. You'll get lots of definitions on this from lots of different people and lots of different organizations. For me, coaching is frequently a lot more specific, a lot more outcome driven, a lot more metric driven. Frequently, coaching is obviously sponsored by an organization, and there tends to be a lot more accountability. Mentoring usually is a bit more loose, a little bit more freewheeling, and thus the reason why you've seen me get very specific about making sure there's certain understandings so feelings don't get hurt. Does that make sense, John?
That's perfect. And what I did is I just put that in a note, so you guys just feel free to do the same. If there was something he said earlier, do it right now. If you guys want to ask questions, go ahead. I'll look for questions as you guys keep the conversation going.
So Josh says, thank you for your presentation. What are some ways where your mentees appreciated you? Oh, that's interesting. I'm looking at my office because sometimes just a small gesture of some of the things that are kind of a remembrance of a poignant part of the relationship. Of course, notes. Everybody loves getting a little bit of note. I especially like if I hear from someone 6 months later. I hope this is the right question. Mentors appreciate you. It's like 6 months, 7 months later. If I get a note where they had a breakthrough on something and they've really been able to move through something and accomplish something, hearing from them about that, email, text, note, is really special. I think most people who are a coach or a mentor, do it because they so deeply care about the other people involved and want them to see them being successful, fulfilled, and happy people. So I think that's really important. I'm looking behind me because I've got some little mementos that people have given me over the course of time that were really reflective of them and some of the breakthroughs they have. So coaches love this, right? So and mentors love this. You know, all of a sudden, just, oh, I'm so clear about this right now, right? And then all of a sudden, and the mentor says, "Oh, that's great. I'm looking for those." Sometimes you call them aha moments, right? They're like, "Oh, wow, that's so clear to me now." It's super helpful. Does that help, Josh? Okay. So it's important to ask the type of feedback a mentee is looking for. Example: opinion or helping mentee think through own thoughts. Yes, absolutely, Sam. It's very important because, you know, I think feelings get hurt sometimes, especially if you're a very experienced mentor or coach and you really want this person to understand something, but they're not quite ready for that yet. And so we maybe jump the gun a little bit and want to make sure that they see something. And you know, as coaches and mentors, we have to remember, meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. And so it's important to keep that in mind. So I appreciate that you put that note in there, Sam. Do you really want my opinion or help to think through your thoughts? Yeah, you know, I have found myself asking that question a lot over the years. So I've been doing this for a while now, because my opinion is just my opinion based upon things. It's probably more effective frequently to have a mentor help you think through something than it is to get their opinion. Although, because you don't know how informed that opinion may be, and we're all subject to our own biases, right? I have my own biases too. Certain groups of people don't like working with me, and certain groups do. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. So thank you for putting that quote on there. Strong Catholic dad, whose name, I'm sorry, I don't remember. Right, thanks. I have a question around your podcast business model, okay? You're clearly building your podcast toward a certain persona. Could you explain your business model? Also, what are your long-term goals of the podcast? Oh, wow, we have 7 minutes left. So I'll tell you the down and dirty of that. I did not start the podcast with any auspicious business model in mind, much to my chagrin. I was getting phone calls from founders in the Midwest who were graduating from accelerators and incubators, who were struggling, and they had heard that I might be a good resource. I was grateful that they would contact me, but our business model was not set up for them. And so I created the podcast as a way for them to learn from other founders, successful founders, about the non-hero journey. So the stuff you don't read about in Fast Company, Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes, etc. And it took off. And I was like, whoa, okay, people really want to hear the real scoop. And so there was no business model. Although in the last 6 months, we're working toward a platform called Founder Life, where it's a membership-based platform where we can have a good price point to be able to help founders work through a lot of the leadership issues and the personal issues that often help them with. So that's the podcast will probably change its name to Founder Life. I'm not quite sure yet. And we will rebrand that and work toward that. And the podcast will be a free mechanism to be able to invite people into our newly emerging business model. Okay, does that help answer the question, Matthew? So I'm scanning where I see Matthew. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. So X2, I'm not quite sure what X2 means, Jose.
That means people are doubling up, so they're emphasizing.
Oh,
you had the same question, is that right?
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks a lot for your answer, Todd.
My pleasure. Is there a good process of discernment for not taking a mentor's advice? Oh, not so easy to do when you recognize what your mentor probably knows a lot more than you. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you brought this up. Oh, Martin, I see you smiling too. There's another version of this, Martin, called mentor whiplash, where one person gives you this piece of advice, this person gives you this piece of advice, you have a family member who tells you this, your wife or your spouse tells you this, and you get mentor whiplash. I think it's important to remind each other, even in any type of relationship, I sincerely appreciate your perspective and insight. Please don't be offended if I take the time to integrate that into my thoughts. And if I happen to take a different track, I hope you will know that you were helpful in making me make my own decision. but sometimes it's important to assert that in the relationship so that, because some mentors, some coaches are really advisors in disguise, right? Or they at least have a very opinionated version about something, and it may be an informed opinion, right? So I think it's important to tackle that confidently, directly, but also with great support and love and caring for them being to take the time to share those thoughts. Because sometimes they do have an experience that colors their approach to that. Anyway, sometimes I want to make sure. Does that help, Martin? Okay, good. So also, how's Gary's project doing now? Oh, he's doing great, doing very, very good. As a matter of fact, Gary is, I changed his name because I don't want anyone to know who it was. Gary's doing very well, doing very, very well. Thank you. Although he had some hiccups during COVID-19, but he's doing well. Thanks for asking. Especially in the coaching situation, how do you recommend building trust virtually right now? Oh, first of all, you have to remind yourself it takes more time. That's number one. Number two, there are other ways of being able to build trust rather than face-to-face. Obviously, sending emails and texts, sending a hard copy thing in the mail to someone, that's also good as well. I think also taking the time to get to know each other from a very personal perspective. And my colleague Amy is a social psychologist, and she frequently says things like connect before content, right? So frequently we're all busy and we want to get into the content first, but it's important to connect first. We did a little bit about that here before things started with some of the folks that were in here. I think that's very important. How do you know if the coaching relationship is what you need on the right track or is fruitful? This is similar to other questions. It's easy to say, well, you just know, you kind of feel it. I've been doing this a long time. You kind of get a sixth sense about this. Do you mean, John, from the mentor perspective or the mentee perspective?
Oh, I was thinking the mentee perspective.
Mentee.
Like the people in this room, what advice would you give us to say, okay, this is on the right track, this is what I need? Because it can be easy to just defer, like, oh, they know what they're doing and just go on that track. But how does one discern if it's what you need or what's right at the time, especially if you may be new in that type of relationship with a coach?
That's a great question. You want to type in some things about that in there so they can share that with each other? I think you can save these comments chats, right, too, John?
Yeah, that's actually why we are asking people to put in the notes so that Claire can keep a record of it.
Yep. Good. So, John, is it okay if people put their responses in there? You can be okay with that?
Me? Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Perfect. Since that's their response, that's hard for me to speak, obviously, for them. Personal life of the mentor. In previous conversations, there are certain elements of her personal life as mentor has shared with me. In recent conversations, she's been more brusquely to business, but I'm generally curious about how those things turned out. How would you recommend appropriately following up? So is it Eden or Ed? I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly.
Sorry, no, my name is Anna. Eden Invitation is my organization.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My
I
apologies.
changed that.
I'm sorry. I'm not quite understanding your question. Could you maybe try it live?
Sure. Yeah. No. So I don't know if this is like more of a women thing, but I feel like some of our conversations feel like we're chatting over wine, and then some of them feel like more of a coach scenario, and I don't always know how to navigate that. So like things that in like the chat over wine conversation, I'm like, oh, like I want to know what happened with your kid, or I want to know what happened with this. But then the next conversation is like super intensely to business. And so I feel a little whiplash sometimes, and thoughts on navigating that as the mentee, because you're like, I know I'm not the person I just am curious how all this went. I don't know.
50% of the people that I coach and mentor are women. I coach a lot of women, and you're not the first person I've heard say that. There's a marriage counseling technique that also works in this situation. And you may have heard this before. Gee, you have an observation, and then you ask a question. Gee, when you do X, it makes me feel Y. Is that how you're taking it as well, right? When we spend so much time talking about personal things, it makes me feel like that that's what you want to do. But then we zoom so quickly into our mentor-mentor relationship, and and I worry about that, or whatever your reaction to that is, and then you ask them a non-threatening, non-put me in the corner question: is that how you're feeling about it as well? Because really, you want to bring it up a discussion to make sure if it's not working for you, right? And if it feels a little bit abrupt, or maybe there's too much personal, then you want to talk through that and recalibrate the relationship. Okay, that's a great formula to use in a lot of relationships. You kind of plug it in as it works for you. Okay, so connecting for content, yes, thank you, Bill. Any more colors or tips in the matchmaking process? Oh, we did this for this program, but it was essentially me making a recommendation and then doing an interview. I'd love to know how to improve this for the future. Yeah, obviously you need a large pool of people, first of all, with which to be able to take a look at. I think one of the things that is helpful is to understand kind of the worldview of the individual. So we all have our worldviews that are more dominant worldviews, okay? And so if you could ask the person to say, hey, what are some of the guiding principles? What are some of the guiding thoughts that you say are part and parcel of your value structure? Like, what are the things you get excited about? What really energizes you? What are the topics, the situations that you feel like you spend more time on with your other mentees and people you coach, that might give me a window into the types of things that you like to emphasize and talk about. That in itself does wonder, because what you'll do is you'll watch their energy level, if you can see them face to face, about various different topics. And then you'll have some, and you'll say, well, these are types of topics and issues and worldview, things that are really important to me. Back to Gary. Gary happens to be an African-American male. He was really focused on making sure that I was sensitive to the issues that he experienced as an African-American male, meaning that I would not be dismissive and just say, well, don't worry about that, right? And so we had long conversations about that, and I had to help him understand what my worldview is about that, and he felt comfortable with it. So I think it's important to bring those things up before they become a problem in the relationship later on. And we worked through it, and it was great, and he was happy. Does that help on that? Okay. So Matthew says, if someone is building a podcast for a specific audience, how often would you recommend they put out content? Also, how do you measure the effectiveness of your podcast content? Wow. How would you recommend they put out content? Well, first of all, you have to be super clear who you want to hang out with and serve. Super clear. Because nowadays, if you just cannot start a podcast, a blog, a business without asking yourself this question. Who do you like to serve and hang out with? Who brings you joy to hang out with? And who do you really want to help on some sort of success path, some sort of transformation that they may be looking for? Once you answer that question, then you can ask yourself, the next question is, how frequently does that group of people like to consume content? Founders are very busy and they get overwhelmed with stuff. And so I knew that mine should be only once a week, because they listen to a lot of other podcasts too, and they don't want to fall behind. There's this guy named John Lee Dumas, who I followed in the very beginning. He had a podcast, daily podcast, interviewing entrepreneurs, and I loved it. But then I started getting behind and listening to his podcast, and I got overwhelmed. I can't keep up. And then it wasn't a good fit for me anymore, because I felt bad because I couldn't listen to all of them. So it really depends upon your audience is the easy way out to answer that question. How would you measure the effectiveness of your podcast content? That is the current $1 million question, okay? Those of you who may listen to Joe Rogan, I don't know why you would want to do that, but you might. He just signed on with Spotify for $100 million, okay? To be exclusive on Spotify. And it took all of our breaths away in the podcasting world. But one way why he's able to get that is because once you have over 5,000 downloads per episode, you are sought after by companies like Midroll in Cincinnati, part of Scripps, to have advertisers on your podcast. So that's one way. I don't measure mine that way. I measure mine by downloads, the number of emails I get from people, stories I hear from people, and also my ability to build relationships with people. I use my podcast also as a way to be able to build relationships with the type of people that I want to serve and help, founders. And so it's a different measurement purpose. Tips for matchmaking: have a big pool. No worldviews with individuals. What gets excited? Yep, awesome question. Is there a process to seeking out a good mentor, or is it normally serendipitous? Well, John, I mean, I think maybe you can help me out with this one. Yours is not serendipitous. There's some formality toward yours, right?
Yeah, the way we did ours, basically, we used our personal networks of OSV, Sherwood, and the Notre Dame networks, and then we curated it. So, for instance, Anna from Eden Initiative mentioned something she was looking for, so we found someone who seemed to fit that. We didn't offer a big pool on it, so we kind of just did go for the first one, see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll go to the second one, etc. But I think Claire might also be just asking. Claire's an intern, and so she might just be in her own world, or anyone else on the line after this world. How do they go out and seek the mentors?
That's a great question. So I need to tell you another little quick story. I know we're over, but John's okay if I tell another quick story?
Yeah, and actually, Todd, let me recommend. So
Please.
We have two people who are podcasters and have podcasting initiatives.
Oh, great.
Some of the questions, what I might offer is for everybody, if you have something that's non-podcast related, maybe throw it like a mentor related question. Let's do those questions right now. But if we can maybe reserve the last 15, 20 minutes to just kind of get deep into podcasts. Would that work for you, Todd?
Sure, happy to share.
Okay. So yeah, let's take the next few minutes, and I'll put a 5-minute timer on my watch right now, and let's do 5 more minutes on mentoring, and then let's move podcasting.
So back to Claire's question. Is that okay right now, John?
That's it. Okay.
So I did tell a quick story, Claire. So I have a friend of mine who was looking for a new job. And he said he wanted to, this was a number of years ago, and he said to me, Todd, I think I'm looking at the energy industry. I said to him, Mike, well, what do you know about the energy industry? He says, well, not much. I said, well, why wouldn't you just create a little list of 15 to 20 people who are knowledgeable in that industry and go have lunch with them and interview them and learn about the industry? He says, oh, why would they want to meet with me? And I said to him, Mike, I'm not so sure that's the question to ask. The question is, why wouldn't they want to meet with you? Okay. And he said, well, give me an example. I said, well, at the time, CG&E, before they sold themselves to Duke Energy, was in Cincinnati, and Jim Rogers was the CEO. I said, well, why wouldn't you just want to have lunch with Jim Rogers? Oh, Todd, why would Jim Rogers want to have lunch with me? And I said, because you're a young professional, you're a customer, they're lonely, no one ever asked that, and who's going to say yes? He said, no, he's not. I said, I'm going to bet you a steak dinner. And so I said, just call his assistant and tell him who you are, and you just want to have a lunch. But don't do this. Don't say you need to get together next week. Give him plenty of time with his calendar. Sure enough, they got together. They had a great conversation. Jim Rogers says that wasn't one of the best conversations he ever had. And he also said it's great to hear from people who I don't talk to very often. He was purposeful in putting together some people in some circles call it the Dream 100. Well, there are people already who you would love to be able to talk to. So why not reach out to them? If they say no, they say no. So I do think that it's our own barriers that we put into place, first of all, because there are people, Claire, who you probably would say, I think these people would be interesting. Okay. Frequently, they're going to say yes. Some may be too busy or say no. They may be in a cycle of life. Like I've been after the founder of Netflix to come on my podcast for a long time. Well, when his book came out, he was suddenly more interested in coming on my podcast. So you got to look at it from their interest perspective too. I hope that I in that question, I see this barrier sometimes that people put up about, well, who's available? Well, there's a lot of people who are available. You just need to remind yourself that you just got to ask. Does that help? John, you're shaking your head.
I loved it, Claire. I bet you did. Oh, she wrote yes, thank you.
Okay, good. So let's see. What do you see as the similarities and differences between mentoring and parenting your kids? Well, do you want the pre-COVID-19 answer or the post-COVID-19 answer? Oh my goodness. Well, I have 2 kids. I have a 16-year-old son who goes to St. X High School in Cincinnati, and I have a soon to be 13-year-old going into 8th grade. They know I'm a coach, and we frequently laugh and say, stop coaching. They say, stop coaching me, Daddy. I think it's very difficult to coach, mentor your kids, your spouse, when you're a mentor or a coach, because they see the stuff coming a mile away. But there are similarities, I think, yes. Asking questions, not jumping to conclusion that you know the right answer to things. Here's a big one, a really, really big one. I will tell you, I often fall down on the job as a parent. I think I'm better at it as a mentor, as a coach, and that is trying not to problem solve something and let the person solve their own problem. Okay, because it's always more effective when we solve our own problems. We learn more when we engage our own brains. Sounding, but one of the funny things that people, like coaches and mentors, say, like in our industry, and there's like memes about it and cartoons about it. Someone will share a story and whatnot, and the coach will say, "Well, how did you think that you're going to solve this problem?" Right? And it's like so cliche because it's like one of the go-to things for a coach to say. And it's a powerful question to ask someone because we already have thoughts and ideas in our mind. Well, that's similar to kids, right? We want our kids to grow and learn, develop us too. Although I will be honest with you, my challenge child for me is my daughter, and it's a little bit harder for me to do that with my daughter, truth be told. Right, strong Catholic dad?
Yes, I understand. 6 daughters.
So, okay, what kind of protections or does it matter if conflict of interest exists between your project and your coach, even though they might be a better coach because of the conflict? So there's a potential conflict of interest and you're working with someone. Trying to think of an example that might be JM. Because usually I try to, kind of like a lawyer. Lawyers do these conflict of interest software when they work with someone to make sure there isn't a conflict of interest. I would say I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question right now, because I would hope that you would work through that beforehand. But if you discovered during the middle of it there's a conflict of interest, I think you need to address it. Relationships need to be open, transparent, free of any type of inhibitions for you both to be able to get out of it. John?
Yeah. Can I follow up on that?
Please.
It's more that there's a coach I'd really like to work with or a mentor I'd like to seek out. And part of it is there is a very likely conflict of interest. But the reality is the narrow market I'm working in, there's very few people out there that can really guide the development of the project at that level.
JM,
so it's almost like,
real quick, are you thinking Krieger for this?
well, either Krieger or even Tim. Like it's a discussion I had with a friend of Tim's yesterday.
Yeah.
He's now the VC world. Tim's a VC. The VC world's full of conflict, always.
Yeah. I can add just one quick comment. We were definitely thinking Krieger, but he does have non-compete issues. You're happy to talk to him about, talk to him directly, but that was something that we specifically considered for you.
Yeah, there's a few others in the world. It's just it's difficult to find someone who has the knowledge base deep enough to really support and coach, but also is willing to get into a discussion.
Yeah.
We're a weird market. A lot of us are when we're like, the Catholic world is small when it comes down to it.
Sure. Very small. I mean, yeah, I had that same conversation with someone else recently. And I would tell you this, a mentor, being a mentor, having a coach, it's a relationship, right, JM? So if you need some specific information or insight about something, carve that out. It doesn't have to be in a mentor relationship. Ask if they're willing to be able to help you out with this perspective about these things, without necessarily an ongoing relationship. Does that help? It sounds like it helped. Okay, good. All right, so supposed to start giving. Okay, so moving into podcasts, questions? Is that okay, John? It looks like we're doing that.
Yeah, if that's okay with everyone. And I was just doing private chats with Jose and Edward, and Jay, you were represented by Edward here. But what I think might be most helpful is, Jose, if you start and just give that 1 minute spiel about what you're doing, and then we can go into the questions after that.
Sure, cool. Thanks a lot. Okay, so what we do at Juan Diego Network is we help other Latinos create and produce their podcasts. Of course, right now it's Catholic and 100% Catholic, but it won't be 100% to evangelize reform, not necessarily. And right now everything's in Spanish. Hopefully soon we'll have English. So we're a network, but we help them create, we find them. We invite them to join the podcast world because there's not much in Spanish, or not much in Catholic Spanish, or not much quality. So that's what we're doing, right? So I've had a podcast for a couple of years now, and it's an interview also podcast. But I had two main questions. One was, well, first of all, regarding how you get yourself known on the podcast world. Were you leveraging 100% on these very important founders, like people who looked on Apple, search on Apple Podcast or Spotify for them, they found it? Or were you using other channels, or what did you do to be out there and become, well, number 2 that you're right now, or number 1 in different categories and stuff?
Thanks for the question, Jose. I'll share 2 or 3 little tidbits that I do is very specific to my situation. So they may or may not be helpful to you, but I just want to be honest with you about it. I, in the very beginning, joined a group called Podcasters Paradise. So it was a group of people who are doing podcasts. And so they helped share that in the beginning, this group of other podcasters. So that was the first kind of wave of people helping me out there. I also leveraged my personal Facebook page, which I think I have, 1,500 people on it, but 99% of them are not founders, but they shared it and it got out. And then I've been on LinkedIn. I'm old, so I've been on LinkedIn since 2004. And literally every day to this day, I send out 75 personalized invitations to connect with a pre-sorted list of founders and CEOs in LinkedIn. I tell them about the free podcast, and I tell them I would love to connect with them. 75 a day, because it's under the 100 threshold, which if you do more than 100 a day, you get slapped by LinkedIn. Okay, and that keeps me under the radar, but a continuous flow of founders, CEOs who listen to my show. Okay, so that's the other one.
But it's just to let them know about the podcast. You're not inviting them to be a guest or anything yet. Okay.
Nothing. All I do is say hi, and it's personalized. I mean, I look up who they are, what they're doing, and I tell them, hey, I'm kind of curious about what you're doing. Looks like it's really interesting what you're doing with XYZ company. I'd love to connect if you would love to connect on LinkedIn. And oh, by the way, I have a free podcast called From Founder to CEO. It's fairly popular. Here's a couple of guests. Here's a link. That's it. It's super short. And I've kind of, and because on LinkedIn, people try to sell you when they have her as soon as you connect with them and all that kind of stuff. And I don't do that. And so that has been very helpful to me. I'm getting close to 15,000 followers on LinkedIn. The vast majority of them are founder and CEOs, but I use Sales Navigator to sort through and make pre-populated lists of those so that every day I'm not having to do that. And truth be told, I go state by state because, like in the Catholic world, we all know each other. And so if I'm cruising through California on my Sales Navigator, sending out those invitations, about a quarter way through that digital cruise, all these people in LA see I'm connected with all their friends in the startup world in LA, and they say, well, Todd must be okay. I'll click yes. So I do it state by state, and then I go back and circle back through again. And so I'm still not done that. I'm still going through state by state, 75 a day. I used to use a little bit of software for that. I didn't realize it violated the terms and conditions for LinkedIn. So I stopped doing it. And now I do it manually every day. Not sexy, and I know it's not what you may want to hear, but it's what works for me. The other thing too is I have not leveraged this, but I know it's powerful, Jose. Super powerful. The most powerful way to grow a podcast is to get on other people's podcasts. Okay, that's the most powerful way. And today it's easier than ever because there are podcast booking agencies who you pay a small premium fee and they have all the data, and you can use them to get these in the pitch. I get 20 pitches a day to get founders on my show, from marketing agencies in New York City to internal marketing companies to book companies, because I've been doing it for 5 years and I have a reputation. I take very good care of my people who say they can come on the show. And so that is the single, and I have not leveraged that yet, mostly because I haven't finished my sales funnel yet. And it doesn't make sense for me to go do that until my sales funnel is ready. So when they say during the interview, hey, so Todd, what else are you working on and where do you want to send people? I'm going to say, well, Founder Life, and they can go to founderlife.com. Is that helpful, Jose?
Yes, a lot. Thanks, Todd. I don't know if Ed has a question. If not, I'll continue.
Matthew has one. Do you mind if I answer Matthew's question first?
Sure.
Where do you go to understand and get educated on the podcast medium, thoughts, tech innovations, etc.? Great question. There's a number of newsletters now. Podcast Journal, Pod News. All you have to do is Google them. That's one way. Second way, I'm also a member of Podcaster Society, run by my good friend Daniel J. Lewis in Northern Kentucky. It's kind of a membership platform for podcasters, and it's relatively inexpensive. And so he monitors the whole podcast marketplace. I host my podcast on Libsyn, Libsyn, and they have a podcast called The Feed. Rob Walsh and Elsie Escobar are amazing about their knowledge about the industry. And I learn a lot by listening to their podcast called The Feed on a regular basis, because they often have segments where they're doing the news. I forget the number, but a significant number of podcasters are on their platform. So they also have an insight about the trends. So in the middle of COVID-19, I wanted to know, because my podcast numbers were down, I want to know, is it me or is it the marketplace? Everyone's podcast numbers went down because people listen to podcasts when they commute, when they work out, and when they are doing the dishes and, at the gym, all that kind of stuff. And they weren't going to the gym. So those are some of the ones. I wonder if there's a Latino podcast booking agency. I don't know that cares enough, but I know who would know. Elsie Escobar, okay, at Libsyn. Email her. You can find her email address on Libsyn. Super easy. She is amazing. She's one of my favorite people to listen to, Jose.
Yes, I listen to her podcast.
Oh, you know her. See,
Yeah.
Email and ask her. She'll know.
But the one that she hosts her own, and she's not very regular in how she posts.
Yeah. You mean a she podcast or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but Elsie would know. Elsie would know, because she's very tied into that. There's about 4 or 5 of them that I'm aware of that are good. Interview Connections is one. They're in Rhode Island. Another one is, I have to open up my browser to tell you them real quick here. Zoom is maxing out my CPU right now, so it'll take a second before it comes up.
While you look that up, Edward, I want to give you a second with the mic if you want it.
Here's Interview Connections, Interview Valet, Geffen Media Group, he's in Israel. And then one of my favorite ones, because I think they do a good job of it, is it's now called Lemon Pie, lemonpie.fm. I like the guys that run that. Their team is really, really, really good. Lemon Pie is the name of that one. I'm sorry, go ahead now if you, someone wanted to ask a question.
Edward, audio is not coming through, or at least on my end for you. And Jay, I don't know if you're still on too, but feel free to jump in with this.
Edward,
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So what I was going to ask, our project's a little different. We're doing a 8-part serialized podcast on the dynamics of race and religion in Baltimore City, using a parish there as the kind of the title for the narrative. And so, but the hope is to do other sorts of religious podcasting, kind of open up that storytelling style podcasting in the religious space, because there's not much of it. There's a lot of talking heads. Actually, Catching Foxes, the guy right down the street from you guys, is in Cincinnati, but huge Catholic, but more talking head type podcast, which is good, but we want to do something a little bit different. And so I guess, as you know, one of the things that's huge is, and it's the first thing you said, was knowing who you want to talk with. Like, and that was huge with the conversation about Joe Rogan. Like, he's got his tribe, right? And so the question being, when you're doing a serialized podcast, do you have any recommendations on ways to cultivate that tribe when you're only putting out a project once in a while, so to speak?
That's a great question, because one of the ones I saw do recently, Dave Ramsey did a serial on the situation with the student debt, and it was just a serial when it ended. But he has 15 million people that listen to him every single day, so he was able to promote it that way. I will tell you that. So I have a Catholic thing that we're launching called Rosary Men soon. We're just getting men at work to say the rosary, and we've been struggling with this whole question too. How do we do that? I think probably, my guess is, in Catholic circles, this is just my guess, Ed. So Edward, it's a mix of old school leather and tech. Okay, meaning like standing outside various different parishes, getting the pastor to say, "Can I pass out this piece of paper?" and stand here passing people. I have seen some people be very effective at building Catholic platforms around that idea. I think also, okay, so take a page out of the non-Catholic world, right? So how do people grow their podcast in general is they steal audiences from other people, right? So, could you get Bishop Barron to interview about it? I mean, how big is his platform, right? And so getting some of the ones that have some distribution right now, I think, is key. At the very least, getting them to do a special email for you from their email platform is huge. Because I think, if I haven't said this before, despite podcasting, LinkedIn, Facebook, everything else, email marketing is the game, right? That's the game still, because you own it, not rent it. And so, Edward, I would say, can you build some partnerships from some partnership launches with some other Catholic organizations that have some pretty solid email lists? And so I'm a member of Tribe, speaking about Tribe. So that's Stu McLaren's platform to be able to help build memberships. And he has 5,000 people in his course right now, paying $1,997 for like a 9-week course. How he got those 5,000 people is Amy Porterfield, David Siteman Garland, all these other partners who have email lists that are part of his launch party plan. That, I think, is probably the most effective approach that I've seen people do. So Sam Guzman, who are those two guys? The Catholic gentleman, I forget, two guys. Bishop Barron, who is it? The Marianists up in Massachusetts have a big email list because, I mean, if you could just shop around and get 10 or 15 of those, and they already have email lists, and get part of a very concentrated campaign where that's not trickle, right? So if it's, you got to be very campaign like it. What's his name? I'm trying to Father. He wrote the book about the rosary, the big thick one.
It's either is it Gately or is it the Surfer?
Yeah, Surfer. Yeah.
Callaway.
Father Callaway. So I spoke to Father Callaway a couple weeks ago, and he kind of revealed some things to me about, because he's been monitoring people's email lists too. And I said, "Oh, Father Callaway, interesting how you know how many people are on people's email lists." He says, "Oh yeah, Todd, remember that's the game right now." Yeah, you know how he talks. And so and so I went to the E6 conference in Cincinnati, February before COVID-19, and holy mackerel, that was an amazing thing. But then I realized, well, how did they get all those people to it? They did the same thing. They built some partner launch partners who had significant email lists to be able to do that. That's the way I would think about it, Edward.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Martin. Oh, you wrote Callaway, yes. So were there any other podcast questions that I could answer or anything else? Happy to.
Bill might have one too. I mean, they have a pretty sizable podcast themselves.
Bill?
Yeah, well, no, my wife produces a daily podcast for Catholic kids that's about 5 to 7 minutes long, dealing on various topics all across formation. And we have about 5,000 emails a day. I think we just recently, maybe 2 years, just recently passed the 1 million download mark. So
Bill,
big email list. So, but it's, you know, and our project here is not. It started out as Catholic Sprouts, but it's really morphed into the Domestic Church Project. But we really see the Catholic Sprouts podcast feeding that project, right? Like kind of being the, like you said, the top of the sales funnel, if you will. Or I'm trying to conceive our flywheel right now, by the way, everyone. So, and I'm trying to really figure out what is it, that thing that if we really push it, you know, what is it? But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Around a lot when you think about getting on. My wife's done that a lot over running this business herself, is leveraging other Catholic normal for her was normally Catholic female personalities and their email address. You know, how can we launch this product together? How can we talk about this? I mean, I think there's opportunities depending on what there are, or how to get on other people's podcasts for sure.
Absolutely.
Figure out how to make it work. But I mean, like, but yeah, so I've been really listening intently a lot of stuff you've been talking, especially some of these like Podcaster Paradise or Podcaster Society or those kind of things. So
it is very difficult to convert a podcast listener into someone on your email list.
Yeah, that's been a thing for us to really think about. I mean, we have a big email list, but I think I don't know if the two are interdependent necessarily, right? That someone necessarily who joins our podcast goes under our email. I mean, we talk a lot about, for those of you there, we talk a lot about free. I mean, so obviously podcast is a free resource, right? But we go further than that, right? Some other free resources that, you know, you can sign up for our free resource library. We've started a Patreon page to help support to make the podcast better quality, but also to offer other free resources as part of that, so that you're not just giving the money, you're also getting a little something more than just the podcast. So that's something to think about too, is, you know, if you give something away for free, and you're really not giving away for free, you're getting their email address.
Right.
Which I do believe in the future, companies certain companies like ours will be valued on that.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Our asset is our book of business, you know, it's our email list. I mean, and it's a very warm email list, right? So,
and what's your open rate?
Yeah. My wife knows those numbers better than I do. It's above normal standards, though, for sure.
No, I wasn't asking you to tell us.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But
I was just saying that
my wife knows that number better than I do. But yeah, exactly. It's how do you get your open rate? You know, and you're constantly looking at your email list and things like that.
So here's what I will tell you that I have learned I have hired a lot of people to help me out with all this stuff over the years. And here's one thing that apparently is working right now. I'm about ready to try it myself, so I can't tell you that's worked for me yet, okay? Just to be clear about this. Creating a mini course is a big email booster that's easier to talk about in your podcast as long as the domain is easy to remember, right?
Right.
And you put it in link in the actual podcast summary, right? So they can just click it and then hyperlink to it. That seems to be working for people right now. Free mini course, okay? Because then you can capture their name and email address, and also you can also get the feedback about other things that they're wanting. But then at the end of the free mini course, upsell them into your next level of value on your value ladder. Yeah. That seems to be working right now. So, yeah.
I would agree. We've tried a few of those things. You know what I mean? Big email generators, for sure.
Prior to COVID-19, I would have told you that a lot of people have a lot of traction with challenges. Okay. Although I've seen and heard myself personally too that people are challenged right now. And so, they're not so excited about having to be challenged to do something else when they're dealing with working from home, dealing with kids and work issues. And, a lot of people out of work right now too. So it's difficult to navigate that. But so, like, for example, Pat Flynn has a really good podcast about all this type of stuff. If those of you don't know Pat Flynn, super good guy. I don't think he's Catholic. I mean, he may be Catholic, but he's not overt about it. And Smart Passive Income is his name of his podcast. And he brought on these Green Smoothie Girls, I think is their name. And they do this thing where they have a challenge, get you to drink a green smoothie a day. That's it. Okay. But then, and so a lot of people sign up for it. It's a great email campaign. They interact. There's lots of good stuff. And then at the end, they sell a cleanse. Okay, that a percentage of that people who participate in the green smoothie a daily challenge buys into. And so because they know the conversion numbers work for them. So that's another way of thinking about how to move people onto an email list that's kind of like a mini course, but you call it a challenge, right? That's another way. John, you're shaking your head like you've seen that before too.
I've seen mini courses and I've seen challenges. I haven't known what's behind the curtain on them as to what's happening. So it's fun to hear about that.
Yeah.
Todd, I do have to go. If you're still willing to stay and other people are still willing to talk, I can assign host Claire. Are you still on right now? Let me see. I just need to assign it to someone, I think. Actually, Todd, I could just assign it to you.
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, so if you're willing to do that, others can say, I just got to run.
Sure. And I'm happy to stay out a little bit longer if anyone needs to.
Todd, this is awesome. I can't wait to start synthesizing a lot of this into notes. I love the dynamic that we had too. I love your talk. I love the Q&A, and then I love the deep dives into some of these. So this was a great first session for us. Big learning one, and thanks for being so gracious and generous with your time.
My pleasure.
All right.
Take care, John.
Bye.
Todd, can I follow up with a question? You mentioned the Dave Ramsey thing, and that's something I've been thinking about a little bit. Do you have any insight into that project that they did? Because for me, it was super fascinating. I mean, he's top 4 radio shows in the United States, probably one of the top podcasts in the United States would be my guest in terms of downloads. And then he goes off and produces what I imagine was a far more expensive project than what he currently does with his daily show. And I just, you mentioned it like you knew had some sort of insight into it. And I didn't know if you did, because that's one thing that we're exploring is kind of story podcasting for hire for Catholic organizations and kind of selling that expensive lift to them and why that might be worthwhile. And I just didn't know if you had any insight into that.
I have a little bit because you might imagine, you can tell I'm an extrovert, so I like interacting with people. And so I reached out to George. George is his video guy. And I went to one of their events here in Cincinnati when they're here. And I forget George's last name. I'll look it up in a minute and tell you. And I reached out to him and I kind of was curious, and he shared a little bit of insights. They spent a lot of time and money in that because it was NPR style.
Yeah. That's what we're doing. Yeah.
And so NPR style, people know it when they hear it. I mean, all the NPR podcasting products are some of the top downloaded podcasts, including Startup, what's that one?
How I Built This with Guy Raz. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's hard to, George was clear, it's hard to replicate that type of thing because they already have a massive audience. And they already did a long lead up with positioning, his name is escaping me. The gentleman who is his Ramsey personality for that segment of the business.
Anthony O'Neill.
Anthony O'Neill, thank you. So Anthony had already put out a year before the 5 mistakes that college students make when they go into college. And they already started building that email list and kind of that focus area for them. So that when they launched that series, they already had an understanding in some of the conversion numbers and some of the touch points that they were going to be able to build into that serial. And they had already started building relationships with the people they wanted to have part of those conversations in that NPR style type product. So it was a long journey. They didn't just, as I understand it, didn't just, put that together overnight. I think they have a 2-year planning calendar, I think, for their book launches and all that. So as you know, Edward, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you already know. It's a long lead time to produce something like that. Yeah. And the most important thing I will tell you is to create what Russell Brunson says and many others, create a dream 100 people and organizations that you want to partner with as part of the launch, so that if you're going to put a lot of time and money and effort into an NPR style thing, you have to put in, if you spent 30% of your time on developing the content and 70% of your time for the launch, then you're going to have success, because it's all about that launch and building those relationships to get that out there. If you don't already have a big platform, that's the issue. Now, if you combine, are you familiar with Jeff Walker's launch plan?
I'm not.
So Jeff Walker is widely considered to be one of the gurus of launch. He's got his book called Launch. I'm looking for it on my shelf right here. And it's kind of a template of, I don't know where it is. Oh, here it is. No, that's not it. I can't scan. I can't find it on my shelf right now, but Jeff Walker is widely considered to be one of the gurus on launch. If you bought his book, you'd have a good understanding of the elements, and you're smart enough to be able to kind of, build it in there.
I guess the other question, if you were talking with his people, one thing, because we did another storytelling podcast on grief. It's kind of depressing, but it's for my day job. But in any case, what we found when we did some limited market research is the people that are listening to some of the current Catholic podcasts that are out there that you're probably familiar with, Pints with Aquinas, Catching Foxes, Among the Lilies, all those types of podcasts. Matt Fratt, all this stuff, right? That they weren't as interested in narrative storytelling podcasts. And so I was wondering, did Ramsey's audience translate, or was he pulling in some different, how did that, because I was looking at the numbers, and the number of reviews were very solid on that, relative to even some of his other Ramsey personalities. And so it clearly paid off, but I didn't know if it was about reaching out to another audience. I just was wondering if you, I know I'm kind of getting you into the insides of it.
I don't know that. I will tell you that Anthony visits schools. He's on a road most of the time.
Yeah.
And so I have a funny feeling. Well, I know for a fact, I attended one of his events. Immediately when you come in, there's a system in place for them to be able to capture your name and email address. They have a free product that they give you. It's like a little worksheet, and there's a tear out thing, and they have a contest to win something. You put your stuff in it, and then they come around and they take it from you. So they're very aggressive about building that email list from their events, so they can do their launches really well. Of course, as you know, he cross promotes on his radio show. But I can only imagine that it was Anthony's shoe leather work for the last 2-3 years, like I was suggesting that you might need to do with parishes. That's what we're going to do with Rosary Men, that contributed to building that email list. Because I do think it's hard to break into the Catholic digital sphere. I mean, a significant number of Catholics are not very digital, okay? And so you have to recognize that, and you have to say to yourself, what offline things am I going to do to be able to bring some of those people into the online world? I think.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll stop asking questions about Dave Ramsey, but this is, you've been great. You've been great. Both on the coaching and the podcasting.
He gets under my skin because I'm number 2 just beneath him of Untitled Leadership podcast.
Oh, really?
I am. And so I kind of send a message every once in a while, because I said to him, hey, Dave, when are you going to come on my show? And I'll get the real scoop from you about what's going on. He hasn't bitten yet. I don't think he will either.
Oh.
Was there anything else that anyone else wanted to talk about?
Just wondering, Todd, if you could, you said that you decided to go and that you're soon going to launch the Founders Life, right? Why did you decide on that model?
I'm sorry, Jose, can you say that again? What I decided on what model?
On that revenue model, like the membership or the subscription service, or instead of so many that are, of course, the standard ones like ads, sponsorships, and so many others that you could have gone.
I think it's because I've gotten to know my audience better over the years. And I'm looking at my whiteboard in front of me. Been doing all the homework as part of Stu McLaren's Tribe membership. And, founders, some of you are in here are founders. They don't have a lot of time, but they're used to paying subscriptions for things, and they don't have a lot of money. And so being able to aggregate them into a membership where they can come and go as they please is what I learned they wanted. So a number of years ago, I launched a product called Trail Team 10. Trail Team 10 was a 6-month cohort of 10 founders to help them solve practical issues that they were working on, simultaneous to building their capacity as a leader. Because founders don't buy leadership development, which is what I sell, and they don't, and they have their own version of what their issues and problems are. And now, after interviewing, getting close to 400, because I have a lot of the interviews I haven't published yet, I now know how they talk about these problems, so I can do better at marketing. So Trail Team 10, when I was doing that, I was trying to get founders into my synchronous 1 hour a week, 6-month program, told me that, Todd, being synchronous, even 1 hour a week is too much for us. We want to come and go as we please. And committing to 6 months is a long time. And your price point, it was, I think, $3,000 for 6 months, although way lower than the Junto Institute in Chicago at about $85,000 for 10 months, was still too much. And so I did it 3 times. I did Trail Team 10 3 times. It was very successful. Got great rave reviews. They love it. But getting them into those programs and launching that all the time was a huge amount of work. So now the model I'm going to try and experiment with is I have a new course called Stress Free Founder, what we're launching in a couple of weeks, where I teach them in 7 days what are some of the triggers of their stress and what their stress behavior look like so they can manage that better, and then sell them into our longer course. And then the back end of that longer course will be our membership, where we'll be live each week helping them implement some of the things that they learned in the course. So the reason why, that's a long way of telling you, because I learned what they really want and how they want it. And I don't, when people want to start a coaching business, I tell, don't start a coaching business. Start a membership platform. Because having to go and get onesie twosie people now is gone. People want to be part of a platform of which coaching is a piece of the value ladder.
Oh, cool. Great advice. Thank you. Have you coached or mentored people who've started or who have their own podcast?
Yes.
Or just business? Yes. Several?
Yes. A couple. Because I try. There are so many other people, Jose, better at that than me. That I just occasionally I do. Not for pay. I just have helped people do that on the side. I mean, Pat Flynn has a great Kickstart program, starting a podcast. There's just so many. I signed up for Cliff Ravenscraft's program 5 years ago. He was in Northern Kentucky. I don't know if he's doing it anymore. He had this program called Podcasting A to Z. It was a course that I took, and that's how I launched it. And I was so stupid about it all. I took it twice because I didn't really know what I was doing, didn't learn as much the first time. And so I finally all kind of gelled in my head and I launched. But Dave Jackson has the School of Podcasting. He's widely considered to be one of the good guys in the space too. So I always kind of refer people to them because it's not part of my business model, and they're so much better at all the ins and outs of it than I am.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Michael, anything that you want to add?
No, this is good. I'm kind of the person who's really hard for you to ever reach, because I'm trying to do more and more cutting down all the information in the world and be like, there's just too much. So, and what I'm doing is I'm putting out content for dads to interact with their kids. And the catch with it is it's finally something that it's not me doing it on my own in my office. It's something I can do, or in the car or wherever. It's something I can do with my kids, and we can grow together. So in some ways I'm kind of like overwhelmed, like, gosh, all this podcasting, even though I'm putting stuff out there, I wonder if other people are like me, where it's just like, it's so much content. I feel like I'm bowled over, and so then I'm pushing back, and it's like, I'm not a very good person to come after for podcasts. And I'm like, no, I don't want to sign up for something else. Like
I agree with you. I think that's one of the reasons why I have learned the hard way. You've got to keep everything crazy, super simple for everyone. Crazy, super simple. Because everyone's overwhelmed with all these things. And it's really hard to break through. I mean, the days of organically being able to launch a podcast and thousands of people, they're gone. I mean, you have to pay for eyeballs now. Unless you're going to combine that with shoe leather and, go to parishes and all that kind of stuff, which I think is a successful technique. I think that's how some people do it. But I think, go ahead.
Yeah, stuff you said in the beginning was great about like the mentoring and some of this insights, like, wow, it's wonderful. But I just know me that it's just like, gosh, because even as I thought about, well, maybe I should sign up because I'm trying to found this thing. And it's like, oh man, because my focus is like, am I getting my prayer time in? And so after I get my prayer time in, and then deal with my work and family, it's like, I'm falling in bed asleep. I don't know how to, so I have difficulty managing that right now. And it's been a struggle as trying to found what I'm doing, because it's like, gosh, I don't want to throw something else on other people's plates as well. Cause even with some of these other projects, like what Edward was talking about, like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, I'd like to hear that. And I'm so limited, and so are the people. So trying to, there's 24 hours and I'm exhausted.
So that's one of the reasons why I'm starting Founder Life, because I'm not going to say his name, but I'm going to metaphorically throw stones at Gary Vee, because this whole idea of just hustle is killing people. It really is. Just hustle as an entrepreneur, and that magic piece of content will go viral at some point in time. It'll change your whole life. No. That's unhealthy. And I think, the only piece of advice I can give you, Michael, because, I'm successful at this, but not a runaway success. We're doing well, but I would say it's keep it very simple and start very small, right? If you did a serial podcast that drove traffic, that's out there driving traffic every once in a while about how to be a great dad, about how to be a great Catholic dad, or there's one dimension about being a great Catholic dad. We're launching Rosary Men. I have been telling my colleagues, Joe and Michael, I said, look, if we want to bring Catholicism into the workplace and make it okay to whip out your rosary and say your rosary while you're at work, okay? We gotta make super simple, super easy, okay? And so we said the only thing we're asking them to do is to say the rosary with us live once a week. That's it. And for 1927, and everything that the vast majority of money we make is going to go support the crisis pregnancy centers in the country. And so that's kind of our model that we're going to do. Now we're just getting started. Really, we're just getting started. We hired our attorney. We just got our CPA, and getting all the foundational stuff going. But we keep reminding ourselves that people are overwhelmed and there's too much to do. And if you can get on your calendar for 20 minutes once a week, the mystery of that day, we're going to pray the rosary together. And our whole mission is just to help men at work live their Catholic life while they're at work by getting Our Lady to help us do that. Mm-hmm. That's it. Because we can't do any more than that right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Well, I was even thinking with what Edward's doing, it's like if things are in little bite-sized pieces, it's a lot easier to like, if there's like, here's a 2-minute, 3-minute thing. If you say, I've got a great podcast for 27 minutes, like and it could be everything that I need. And I'm walking, and it's like, oh boy. So yeah, and it's so that's part of the challenge, because we were going to go the route of uploading YouTube videos where I'm going to talk about, I mean, one of my favorite topics is failures as a father, you know, like, because some of those things, and the other dads are like, yeah, it's like, me too. Like I wounded my child in that way too. It's like, yeah, I didn't sign up to be a wounder, but welcome to humanity. You wound. So some of this stuff, but again, I've been saying, gosh, should we push this over into podcast too? And it's like, and then that's a whole environment to navigate. It's like, wow.
It is. Just start very, very small. You know, I would even you know what they say? They say niche until it hurts, right? And so, okay, you've identified Catholic fathers. That's a niche. There's a population of that. One step further, okay, what problem does the Catholic fathers have? I feel guilty because I'm angry with my kids lately. How do I marry up my Catholic faith with being angry? This just reminds me of too. I'm sorry, as an aside, this reminds me of something else. So do you all know Father Catholic Leadership Network now? He's in Denver. I'll remember him. Father Nathan Cromley. Y'all know him? Do you ever go visit? Okay.
Right.
So he wants to be like the Catholic chaplain for business leaders. Okay. And you know, I love him very much. He comes to Cincinnati all the time, and I love going to his events. And I keep reminding him, I said, you got to solve one problem for all of us. One problem. Your great leadership model is wonderful. Coming to these events are great. But I said, people are going to tune in when you solve one problem. And when I realized that about a year and a half ago, when I went through Russell Brunson's training about sales funnels, and I realized how I am not knowledgeable about that, and I realized digital sales funnels are the way you can get super specific about something and drive traffic to that super thing and solve one small micro problem. That's the opportunity, but it turns out it's very hard to do that. Very hard, because you know, we want to solve a lot of problems, and we think as a Catholic dad, you know, so I will tell you, just do a survey of 40 Catholic dads, ask them their inner challenge, Michael, not their external challenge, their inner challenge. And then ask them how they consume content or how they consume things, and they'll tell you the medium, and then you'll create a little digital sales funnel and keep it small and easy, and then from there, keep praying on it, and you'll find the way. Just like I have, slowly but surely, I found my way. And it doesn't happen overnight. It may have been able to do that 10 years ago digitally, but not now. I mean, Bishop, have you seen the team that Bishop Barron has?
Just aware that it's pretty big.
Oh my gosh. And for some reason, they're all big strapping dudes. I don't know what it's all about, but I mean, he's got a machine working him doing that. And he is just amazing to me. You know who also is a machine with a very small team of people? He's very provocative with the Catholic Church. He's a former Anglican priest. What's his name? Oh my gosh. I had to stop listening to him because he gets kind of negative about, you know, dinging on Rome and stuff.
Oh, Marshall, Taylor Marshall.
Taylor Marshall.
Yes.
Taylor Marshall. Yeah. He's a machine too. He's got even a smaller team, and he's a machine. So, you know, I mean, they find ways to be able to start small on something micro first, solving one small problem.
Okay. So it sounds like you feel guilty about being angry.
No, I don't.
No.
One of my friends was telling me the other day how much he was yelling at his son all the time. And then, you know, watching church online on Sunday, which is not, you know, it's hard to be in the environment, you know. And I was trying to tell him that I think many of us are experiencing not going to church on Sunday and live streaming it is different. And so, you know, and he was talking about how he was getting angry at his son during the live stream. And it's been in my mind thinking about, well, it's hard, the job of a dad is even harder if you're live streaming mass, because you're not in the environment that helps to contribute to be able to do that, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. So no, that although that has been a challenge, it's not something that I think is one of my biggest challenges. But I think there are.
Yeah, we're still late to mass.
Yeah.
So I gotta jump off, but I thank you
Edward.
so much. This has been phenomenal.
Glad to be helpful.
Very, very good.
Glad to be helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I also have to jump out, Todd. I appreciate it a lot, your insights and all your, well, yes, a lot of things that I'm going to be thinking about from this conversation. Thanks a lot for your
Don't
for
give
your
up,
help.
Jose. I love your mission. Don't give up.
I won't.
Right.
Hopefully you'll pray for the mission.
I will.
And looking forward to Rosary Man. When is that,
thank you.
When's that launching, or when's that happening?
Hopefully in the next 3 to 4 weeks. We're just working through not-for-profit corporation legal membership issues.
Oh,
Just trying to make sure that we understand how that works, because we don't want anyone to influence the direction of we're concerned that we might get targeted by people who are interested in supporting the CPCs.
oh yeah.
So we're working through the legal issues right now.
Okay, well, hope you can let us know. Or is there? You already have the URL?
We have the URL. Can you imagine that? Yes. But I don't think there's anything there. Oh, you know what? Our development pages may be up right now. I don't know, because Michael is the one who handles that for us.
Yeah, there's a GoDaddy.
Oh, it's a GoDaddy. Okay. He hasn't changed
Okay.
it over
Yeah,
yet.
just wanted to add my email to the list or something to let me know, so I don't forget.
I'll send you something.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jose. Take care. God bless you.
Thanks. You too. See you.